Picture this. A massive multinational corporation is brought to its knees. We are talking millions of dollars of proprietary data, next-generation trade secrets, and ultra-confidential client lists, just gone overnight.
And almost always, it's stolen by an insider, someone they trusted.
Exactly, stolen by an insider. Now, the culprit thinks they're a ghost.
Yeah.
They meticulously wiped their hard drive, cleared every trace of their browser history, bypassed the physical security cameras in the building, and even went so far as to smash their company-issued smartphone into pieces before throwing it in a river.
So they really think they've committed the perfect, untraceable corporate crime.
They do. But what happens when a deleted file isn't actually deleted? What happens when a seemingly harmless late-night internet search, or even a timestamp secretly stored on the break room's smart coffee maker, begins to unravel this entire corporate espionage ring?
I mean, it sounds like the opening sequence of a high-budget Netflix true crime documentary. But the reality, though, is that this isn't Hollywood fiction. This is the very real, incredibly high-stakes landscape we operate in today. We're looking at a digital ecosystem where absolutely every interaction, every click, every automated background process leaves a trace.
And finding, preserving, and interpreting those invisible traces has essentially become the ultimate modern investigative superpower.
That's a great way to put it. It really is a superpower.
And that invisible superpower is exactly what we are unlocking today. Welcome to this custom-tailored deep dive. If you are tuning in, especially if you are a student studying business, management information systems, CIS or IT, over at the Dr. Sampak College of Business at Tarleton State University.
Or really any program that touches on the intersection of business and technology.
Yes, exactly. This journey is designed specifically for you. We are kicking off a massive 15-part exploration to completely future-proof your career. Our mission today is unpacking Chapter 1, Understanding the Digital Forensic Profession and Investigations.
It's the foundation for everything else we're going to cover.
It is. But real quick, before we pull back the curtain on this hidden digital world, take 1 second right now to like, subscribe, and share this deep dive. You do not want to miss the insider tips we'll be dropping.
Yeah, these are the practical, real-world insights that will position you for a massive advantage when you step into your chosen career.
Absolutely. Also, be sure to check the description down below for access to additional high-value resources that will help you master this material. All right, let's jump right in. The source material for this deep dive lays out a tremendous foundation. But the very first hurdle is just defining what we are actually talking about.
Right, because the definition gets thrown around a lot.
We hear the term digital forensics constantly, usually while someone is watching a CSI spinoff where a hacker is, typing furiously in a dark room.
Yeah.
But I was looking at the formal definition in the text, and it's much more rigid than that.
Much more.
It defines digital forensics as the application of computer science and investigative procedures for a legal purpose.
That phrase, for a legal purpose, that is the entire anchor of the profession. It is what separates a forensic investigator from an IT support technician.
So it's not just about poking around a hard drive and finding hidden files.
Not at all. It is an incredibly rigorous discipline. It involves analyzing digital evidence, obtaining specific search warrants, maintaining a flawless and documented chain of custody.
Which we'll get into later because that part is fascinating.
Oh, it's critical. And it involves validating data with complex mathematical hash functions, using heavily tested tools, ensuring complete repeatability of your findings, writing comprehensive reports, and eventually presenting that evidence as an expert witness.
In a court of law or to a corporate board of directors.
Exactly. Every single action taken by a digital forensic professional is done with the assumption that a hostile defense attorney or a highly skeptical CEO is going to put that action under a microscope.
So it's a far cry from the TV trope of a rogue detective plugging a USB drive into a suspect's laptop and screaming, "I'm in."
The Hollywood version is notoriously, almost comically, inaccurate. To understand where the field is today, you have to look at how it evolved.
Okay, take us back. What did it look like 20 years ago?
Well, if we rewind 20 or 30 years, the profession was incredibly narrow. It was primarily focused on what we call dead box forensics.
Dead box forensics, meaning the computer's turned off.
Right. That meant securing and analyzing data on a single powered-off hard drive. Law enforcement would raid a house, seize a beige computer tower, bring it back to a physical lab, image the drive, and look for static evidence for a trial.
But technology didn't just evolve. It exploded.
It did. The profession had to adapt to survive. Today, digital forensics encompasses a massive interconnected range of activities. We're dealing with live incident response while a cyber attack is actively happening.
Like trying to stop the bleeding while you investigate.
Exactly. We are dealing with corporate e-discovery, vulnerability and threat assessment, and enterprise-wide risk management.
I think this is where it gets really fascinating, especially for anyone looking at the future of business liability. The scope of what investigators are looking at has expanded exponentially because of the Internet of Things, or IoT.
Oh, the IoT has completely revolutionized the investigative landscape.
The reading makes it clear we aren't just talking about laptops, desktops, and company servers anymore. We are talking about everyday objects.
Billions of physical devices around the world that are now connected to the internet. They're all collecting and sharing data via sensors, software, and embedded chips. These devices are ubiquitous.
Give me a real-world example that a business student might not immediately think of.
Think about the modern vehicle. A new car isn't just a machine, it's a massive, rolling computer network.
Right, because of the navigation and entertainment systems.
It's more than that. It records your GPS location down to the meter, it syncs your phone contacts, it logs exactly when the doors were opened, when the brakes were applied, and even the weight of the person sitting in the passenger seat.
That is wild. And what about inside a house?
Home appliances are huge targets now. We are talking about smart TVs that track viewing habits and ambient audio, dishwashers connected to home Wi-Fi networks, smart thermostats, and coffee makers. Even pet tracking microchips store data.
You mentioned the smart thermostat. Imagine a scenario where a suspect claims they weren't at the scene of a crime, or an employee claims they weren't at the office during a weekend data breach.
But the smart thermostat logs showed that someone manually adjusted the temperature from 68 to 72 degrees at 2 a.m. on a Sunday.
Or a Garmin smartwatch that records a massive spike in a wearer's heart rate at the exact minute an alleged physical altercation occurred. Your own appliances can literally serve as digital witnesses against you.
They frequently do. In a modern investigation, that IoT data is often the missing puzzle piece that corroborates or entirely disproves a suspect's alibi. The data is impartial.
It doesn't lie, it doesn't forget, and it doesn't get confused on the witness stand.
Exactly. Now, I want to make sure we clarify something for the listeners right out of the gate, because the text highlights this as a major trap that a lot of incoming IT professionals and business managers fall into.
Oh, you mean the difference between digital forensics and data recovery?
Yes, because to a layman, they sound like the exact same process. You're finding files that someone thought were gone.
So what is the fundamental difference? Let's break that down for the students listening.
It is a critical distinction to make. Data recovery is simply the process of retrieving files that were deleted, whether that deletion was accidental or purposeful.
So if you were working on a massive financial forecast for your business classes, and you accidentally delete the Excel file and empty your recycle bin, you might use a commercial software tool to scrape your hard drive and get that file back.
Right. That is data recovery. The goal is just to restore the information so you can keep working. Digital forensics, on the other hand, is bound by rigorous, uncompromising legal and scientific standards.
Because if you are recovering a deleted financial spreadsheet to prove that the chief financial officer was embezzling funds, you can't just walk into a courtroom or a board meeting and say, hey everyone, I ran a recovery tool and look what popped up.
You would be laughed out of the room and the evidence would be immediately thrown out. In digital forensics, you have to prove exactly how you found that file.
You must prove, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that you did not alter that file, even by a single byte, while you were retrieving it.
Most importantly, you have to prove that if an opposing forensic expert used the same methods on the same drive, they would find the exact same thing.
This is the concept of repeatable findings, right?
Exactly. If your investigative process cannot be repeated to produce identical results, it is not scientifically valid.
I noticed the source material kept referencing mathematical hash validation as the way investigators prove a file hasn't been altered. Let's pause on that, because if I'm a business student, I might be picturing some incredibly complex calculus equation.
It's actually a fairly simple concept to grasp.
What is a hash in plain English, and how does it prove a file is authentic?
The best way to understand a mathematical hash is to think of it as a digital fingerprint for a file or a hard drive.
Okay, a digital fingerprint.
When you run a file, say a photograph or a text document, through a hashing algorithm, the algorithm looks at the underlying binary data of that file, all the ones and zeros, and it generates a unique fixed-length string of letters and numbers.
So it spits out a code based on the data.
Right. Let's say you have a photograph of a signed contract. You run a hashing algorithm on it, and it gives you a hash value that looks like a random string of 32 characters.
Okay, I follow you.
Now, if you were to take that photograph, open it in editing software, and change literally one single pixel, maybe you make one pixel a slightly darker shade of blue, and then save the file.
The image might look identical to the human eye.
But if you run that altered file through the same hashing algorithm again, the resulting 32-character string will be completely, radically different.
So it's an absolute guarantee of integrity. If the hash matches the original, you can confidently tell a judge or a CEO that this file is exactly as it was when we seized the computer.
It is the bedrock of digital evidence. By calculating the hash value of a suspect's hard drive before you analyze it, and then checking that hash value again after you are done, you mathematically prove that your investigation did not tamper with the evidence.
That brings up a fascinating dynamic regarding the legal system itself. We have these highly advanced mathematical algorithms and IoT devices, but the law, well, it moves at the notoriously slow speed of government bureaucracy.
Technology is moving at light speed, and the statutes are walking.
It creates a massive friction point in the profession, doesn't it?
It does. The reality is that the legal system is constantly playing catch-up. Technology evolves so rapidly that specific statutes and regulations regarding computer crimes, data privacy, and digital search parameters often do not exist yet for the newest platforms or devices.
I can imagine. I doubt there is a specific federal law written in the 1990s that explicitly dictates how police can pull GPS data from a Wi-Fi connected refrigerator.
Exactly the problem. Because the statutes lag behind, judges and attorneys are forced to heavily rely on case law.
Case law being the precedent set by previous court rulings rather than laws written by the legislature, right?
Yes. When a judge is faced with a novel technology, say, the first time law enforcement wanted to pull data from an Amazon Echo device, they have to look back at how previous courts ruled on similar older technologies, like wiretaps on landline phones.
So they apply the underlying legal philosophy of older rulings to the new technology.
And almost all of this legal philosophy circles back to a foundational document, the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which is part of the Bill of Rights.
For the listener who hasn't taken a constitutional law class recently, the Fourth Amendment protects everyone's right to be secure in their person, their residence, and their property against unreasonable search and seizure.
It mandates that the government, and any agents acting on behalf of the government, must have probable cause to conduct a search.
Which means law enforcement cannot simply seize your laptop or your smartphone and start digging through your personal emails and text messages just because they have a hunch.
No, they have to articulate to a judge exactly what they believe they will find and why they believe it's there.
This raises a highly specific and frequent question in digital forensics. What happens when a person is physically arrested on the street?
That's a great scenario to unpack. When someone is taken into custody, law enforcement personnel absolutely have the right and the authority to confiscate any physical items, including digital devices, that the arrested person is carrying on them.
That makes sense. You have to secure the scene, ensure the suspect doesn't have a weapon, and prevent them from throwing their phone down a storm drain to destroy evidence.
Taking the phone is perfectly legal under a search incident to arrest. But, and this is a massive distinction that defense attorneys will fight tooth and nail over, confiscating the physical device does not automatically grant law enforcement the right to search the digital contents inside that device.
So having the phone doesn't mean you could open the phone.
Correct. To actually turn the phone on, bypass the lock screen, and read the messages, they generally need to go back to a judge and obtain a specific search warrant that explicitly outlines what digital data they are looking for.
Confiscating the plastic and glass hardware is one legal action. Searching the invisible digital data is an entirely separate legal action.
That line between physical confiscation and digital search is so important.
And it acts as the perfect bridge to understanding the structure of the investigative world. The source material draws a very hard line here.
It really does divide the field.
If you are a student, especially if you are studying business management or IT, you have to understand that digital forensics is split into two very distinct hemispheres: the public sector and the private sector.
The rules of engagement are completely different depending on which side of that line you stand on.
Let's unpack the public sector first.
Public sector investigations involve government agencies. This could be local police departments, state bureaus of investigation, or federal entities like the FBI, the DEA, or Homeland Security.
And what is their primary objective?
Their focus is strictly on enforcing criminal codes and gathering evidence for criminal prosecution.
So we are talking about a police detective investigating a cyberstalking case, or a federal task force tracking down an international ransomware syndicate that just locked up a hospital's network.
Right. And because the ultimate stakes in a public sector investigation are incredibly high, you are potentially trying to deprive a citizen of their freedom and send them to prison. The legal processes governing these investigations are incredibly strict and rigid.
They can't afford any mistakes.
Exactly. Public sector investigators must meticulously follow standard legal processes, strict guidelines on search and seizure dictated by the Fourth Amendment, and methodical steps to build a case that can withstand a criminal trial.
Now, the text mentions two specific types of evidence they look for: inculpatory and exculpatory. Let's break those terms down, because they are foundational.
Let's start with inculpatory evidence. That is the data that indicates a suspect is guilty of the crime with which they have been charged. It inculpates them.
This is the smoking gun, the threatening text message, the downloaded illegal files, the web history showing searches for how to hide money.
Exactly. Now, exculpatory evidence is the exact opposite. It is evidence that indicates the suspect is innocent or at least casts reasonable doubt on their guilt.
I think this is a huge misconception people have. You see police on TV, and they are purely trying to build a case against the suspect. But in reality, a digital forensics examiner in the public sector isn't just a prosecution weapon.
A true professional in the public sector is an objective seeker of the truth. They are not simply trying to prove guilt.
So if they find something that clears the suspect, they have to report it.
They are legally and ethically obligated to document that exculpatory evidence. If an investigator finds a digital artifact that proves the suspect's computer was remotely hijacked by a hacker at the time the illegal files were downloaded, they must report that. The goal is the objective truth of the data.
Okay, that covers the government side. But let's bring this back to the listener. If you are sitting in a management class, an information systems class, or preparing for an MBA, the statistical reality is that you are probably going to spend your career in the private sector.
Very true. Most students will enter the corporate world.
You aren't going to be writing search warrants for the FBI. So how does a private sector investigation differ? And why should a future business leader care?
The private sector is an entirely different ecosystem, and grasping this difference is vital for anyone stepping into corporate leadership. Private sector investigations are conducted by corporate entities, businesses, NGOs, and private institutions.
So they aren't enforcing criminal law.
Not typically. Instead, private investigations focus on company policy violations, hostile work environments, and white-collar crimes.
When we say white-collar crimes in this context, we are talking about internal embezzlement, the falsification of corporate financial records, corporate identity theft, or the theft of valuable intellectual property.
Yes, or investigating a hostile work environment, which can be legally devastating for a company.
A hostile work environment occurs when employees cannot safely or comfortably perform their duties because of the actions of others, right?
Correct. In the digital realm, this means investigating complaints about an employee using the company server to send threatening or discriminatory emails, or viewing inappropriate websites on a workstation visible to others.
But here is the absolute most critical difference, and this is the real aha moment for any business student analyzing this field. In the private sector, the primary goal of an investigation is almost never putting someone in a jail cell.
No, the primary goal is business continuity, protecting the company's profits and reputation.
Business continuity. That is the magic phrase for corporate leadership. Keep the lights on, keep the servers running, keep the shareholders happy.
Everything revolves around that. A corporation wants to identify the internal problem, stop the data leak, terminate the bad actor, and plug the security hole. And they want to do all of it with minimal interruption to their daily operations.
Think about it from a PR perspective. If a major tech company discovers an employee is stealing data, a massive, highly publicized FBI raid with yellow tape around the office building is going to terrify clients, tank the stock price, and permanently damage the brand.
So private companies strongly prefer to handle these infractions internally whenever legally possible. They utilize their own private digital forensics specialists or hire third-party consulting firms.
You're containing the blast radius. But wait, if a company is handling an investigation internally, how do they navigate the Fourth Amendment?
That's the beauty of it. They don't have to in the same way.
Really? You can't just call a judge and get a search warrant because you suspect Jim, in accounting, is stealing client lists. Does a boss or an IT manager actually have the legal right to just start searching through an employee's computer?
This is where we get into the brilliant, proactive legal mechanisms of corporate IT and human resources. In the private sector, companies completely bypass the need for a search warrant by legally establishing ownership of the devices and dictating authorized use right from the very start of an employee's tenure.
And how do they practically do that?
They achieve this through robust company policies, employment contracts, and, most visibly on a daily basis, through warning banners.
Ah, the warning banner. If you've ever worked a corporate job, you know exactly what this is.
Everyone has seen them.
It's that annoying wall of legal text that pops up on your screen every single morning. You can't actually log into your work computer or connect your phone to the company Wi-Fi until you physically click a button that says, accept or omit.
I agree.
And I think most of us just blindly click it without reading a single word.
Right. We just want to check our email. But that annoying wall of text is actually an impenetrable legal shield for the corporation. A properly drafted warning banner explicitly states the company's ownership of the computer hardware, the network, and all data residing on it. It specifies the appropriate authorized use of the machine and the internet access.
So by clicking accept, the employee legally acknowledges that the company owns the device, owns the data, and retains the absolute right to monitor, intercept, or search that device at any time for any reason without prior notice.
That is a massive takeaway for anyone entering the workforce or preparing to manage a team. By clicking accept on that warning banner, you are legally waiving your expectation of privacy on that specific company-owned device.
You are surrendering that expectation of privacy entirely. Because the company legally owns the property and you've consented to their terms of use, the company does not need a search warrant or probable cause to look through the hard drive.
Now, even with that tremendous legal authority, a well-run corporation cannot just operate in a state of chaos where any IT admin can randomly investigate any employee they don't like. That's a recipe for lawsuits.
So how do they keep it professional?
To maintain order, companies establish a strict line of authority and designate what is known as an authorized requester.
Put the listener in the shoes of a future executive here. Who is the authorized requester?
In a private sector environment, the authorized requester is the specific person or group who has the explicit, documented authority to initiate a forensic investigation.
So if you are listening to this and you end up as a VP of operations, a chief information security officer, or a director of human resources, you will likely be the authorized requester.
Exactly. An IT technician cannot just decide to image a coworker's hard drive because they are curious. The authorized requester must initiate the probe, ensuring that the investigation is being conducted for legitimate business reasons.
Like an HR complaint or a suspected policy violation, not just for personal snooping.
Right. And the requester carries the liability of ensuring the investigation is justified.
So we have the rules of engagement clearly defined. Whether you are a federal agent executing a search warrant in the public sector or a corporate security officer acting on an authorized request in the private sector, how do you actually do the forensics?
There is a very rigid methodology, and it is directly modeled on the scientific method.
I know we emphasized earlier that this is a strict science, so there has clearly got to be a systematic approach.
To ensure repeatability and accuracy, investigators follow a standard 5-step process for any case they take on. The role of a digital forensics professional is to gather data methodically and objectively.
I was reviewing this 5-step process in the text, and it really struck me how identical it is to the basic scientific method we all learned in middle school science class.
It really is. It's just applied to hard drives instead of Petri dishes.
Let's walk through it using a hypothetical business scenario. Let's say the VP of sales, acting as the authorized requester, comes to you, the forensic investigator. The VP suspects that a top sales rep is secretly emailing the company's highly confidential client list to a competitor before leaving to take a new job.
A very common scenario.
How does step 1 apply here?
Step 1 is to form a hypothesis of the reported incident or crime. You start by asking, what do we logically think happened based on the initial allegation?
So in this scenario, the hypothesis is straightforward. We hypothesize that the sales rep has illicitly transferred the proprietary client list file from their company workstation to an external entity, likely via webmail or a personal cloud storage account, in violation of their employment contract.
Exactly. You lay out what you expect to find. Okay, so we have our working theory. Step 2 is to identify the digital artifacts that might contain the evidence to support that hypothesis.
Artifacts meaning the specific devices or logs.
Right. If our theory is true, where would the digital footprints be located? For this case, the artifacts we need to target would be the sales rep's physical company laptop, the company's internal email server logs, and the firewall logs showing outbound web traffic to sites like Google Drive or Dropbox.
And perhaps the registry keys on the laptop that record every time a USB flash drive was plugged into the machine.
Perfect, yes. You're building a map of where to look so you aren't just blindly searching millions of files.
Step 3 sounds like it's time to actually get hands-on with the data.
It is. Step 3 is to collect and extract evidence from those identified artifacts. This is the highly technical phase. The investigator will securely acquire the laptop, make a forensic image of the hard drive, which we will detail extensively later, and use specialized extraction tools to pull the email logs and web history without altering a single byte of the original data.
Okay, so you have the data safely extracted. What's next?
Once the data is extracted, we move to step 4. Analyze the collected evidence to support or dispute the hypothesis.
I want to highlight that phrase, or dispute. I mentioned this earlier, but is it really that common for a corporate investigator to prove that a suspect is innocent? It feels like if you've gone through all the trouble of seizing their laptop, you're pretty sure they did it.
It happens more often than you might think, and this is where objectivity is tested. You must let the data tell the story. You cannot force the data to fit your initial theory.
Give me an example of how that might play out in our scenario.
Well, during analysis, you might find that the client list was accessed and transferred, but the logs show it was transferred to a secure, authorized third-party vendor that the company partnered with for a new marketing campaign.
So the evidence disputes the hypothesis of corporate espionage.
Yes. It points instead to a miscommunication between the sales team and the VP.
Which saves the company from wrongfully firing a top performer and facing a massive lawsuit. So whether the data proves guilt or innocence, you have to bring it all together. What is the final step?
Step 5 is to create a thesis of your findings. This is the synthesis phase. You compile all the verified digital evidence, the timeline of events, and your technical analysis into a comprehensive, understandable report.
And this often takes a specific legal form, right?
Yes, this often culminates in an affidavit. That's a sworn, notarized document given under penalty of perjury detailing the exact findings. This document must be written in a way that non-technical people, like a jury, a judge, or a board of directors, can easily understand.
Form a hypothesis, identify artifacts, collect evidence, analyze it objectively, and create a thesis. It sounds incredibly systematic. But navigating that system requires an intense level of personal integrity.
Without integrity, the whole system collapses.
The source material dedicates a significant portion to professional conduct and ethics. For a business student, it's easy to view ethics as just a preachy philosophical concept. But in digital forensics, professional conduct seems fundamentally tied to liability and credibility.
Professional conduct is the absolute cornerstone of the profession. It is defined as the behavior expected of an employee in a professional setting, encompassing ethical standards, morals, and strict rules of behavior.
Because you're dealing with people's livelihoods, their private lives, and the reputation of the entire corporation.
A digital forensics investigator operates in a position of extreme trust. When you image a hard drive, you don't just see the stolen files, you see everything.
You see their personal financial records, their private medical searches, their communications with their spouse.
Exactly. If an investigator lacks the moral compass to keep that information strictly confidential, if they start gossiping in the break room about what they found on a coworker's hard drive, the entire investigation is instantly compromised.
Not to mention, the company just opened itself up to a massive invasion of privacy lawsuit.
The liability is immense. And beyond corporate liability, it destroys the investigator's personal credibility.
Because if an opposing attorney can prove that an investigator acted unethically, was biased, or lacked objectivity,
that investigator's testimony will be shredded in court.
Maintaining this credibility is why serious professionals often join organizations like CTIN, the Computer Technology Investigators Network, or IACIS, the International Association of Computer Investigative Specialists.
Those organizations aren't just social clubs. They provide rigorous training, continuous certification, and a strict code of ethics that members must swear to abide by.
Holding these certifications adds tremendous, verifiable weight to an investigator's credentials when they take the witness stand. And part of demonstrating that rigorous professional conduct is how you physically handle the evidence itself.
Now we're getting into the physical reality of the job.
Right. I want to spend some time on the chain of custody. When reading the textbook, this concept felt like the single most fragile, perilous part of any investigation. You can have the best digital evidence in the world, but if this chain breaks, it's all worthless.
It is the Achilles heel of many failed cases. The chain of custody is the meticulously documented route that evidence takes from the exact moment the investigator seizes it until the case is permanently closed or goes to trial.
Think of it as a flawless, unbroken paper trail.
That proves where the evidence was, who had access to it, and what was done to it every single second of every single day.
So what happens if there is a gap? Say, a laptop was left on an investigator's desk unattended for 2 hours before being locked in the safe, and that gap isn't documented.
A competent defense attorney will aggressively argue that the evidence could have been tampered with during that undocumented window, and in most cases, a judge will agree and throw the evidence out.
So how do you practically maintain a flawless chain of custody in the real world? It's not just holding on to a seized hard drive really tightly while you walk around the office.
It requires specific physical tools, secure facilities, and obsessive paperwork. When you seize a physical device, the first thing you do is place it in an evidence bag.
Like a plastic Ziploc.
No, for electronics, this must be a specialized anti-static bag used to transport computer components safely without static electricity wiping the data. The bag is sealed with tamper-evident tape.
Then comes the documentation, specifically the evidence custody form. Every single time that evidence moves, it is logged. I see there are a couple different types of these forms detailed in the source materials, the single evidence form and the multi-evidence form.
The distinction is practical. It depends on the scale of the initial seizure and the specific life cycle of the item.
When do you use the multi-evidence form?
A multi-evidence form is used at the crime scene or the office desk to list all the items associated with a single case on one sheet. Imagine raiding a suspect's home office. You might seize a laptop, 2 external hard drives, a smartphone, and a tablet.
So you list all 5 items on a multi-evidence form to give a broad, immediate overview of the seizure for the case file.
Right. But once you get back to the lab, you transition to a single evidence form. This form dedicates an entire, continuously updated page to just one specific item.
Because the laptop might be analyzed by one expert, while the smartphone is sent to a different lab entirely.
Precisely. The single evidence form travels with the specific item. It allows investigators to add granular, time-stamped detail about exactly what was done to that specific piece of evidence.
Who checked it out of the secure locker? At what exact minute? For what specific type of forensic analysis? When was it returned to the locker and who verified the seal?
Yeah.
Every single touch, every transfer of custody is documented.
It is a grueling administrative task, but it is the only way to survive cross-examination.
All right, let's take all these theoretical rules. The public versus private sectors, the authorized requester, the 5-step method, and the chain of custody. And let's put them into real-world business scenarios.
Let's do it.
For the MIS and management students listening, let's talk about the actual cases you're going to encounter in your careers. We are talking about the insider threat. The text outlines specific procedures for private sector high-tech investigations. Let's start with a really common everyday corporate headache: internet and email abuse.
Internet and email abuse are incredibly common company policy violations that IT departments deal with constantly.
On the milder end, this could be an employee who is supposed to be working, but is instead surfing the internet, streaming Netflix, or doing personal online shopping for 3 hours a day, effectively stealing company time.
Right. But on the darker, high liability end, it could be an employee viewing inappropriate or pornographic content on a company machine, sending offensive messages, or actively harassing a coworker through the internal chat system.
Imagine you're sitting at your desk right now, and the HR director, acting as the authorized requester, comes to you with a formal complaint. Employee X is allegedly harassing Employee Y via email. How do you, the corporate investigator, start pulling that data without breaking the law or the chain of custody?
You have to target specific artifacts. First, you need to pull the organization's internet proxy server logs, which track all inbound and outbound web traffic.
And you'd need the suspect's computer info, too.
You also need the suspect computer's IP address and network name, which you would obtain quietly from the network administrator. Then you need secure access to the suspect's computer disk drive, or the central exchange server where the emails are housed.
And then you use a forensic tool to search for those specific messages.
Yes. You'll use your preferred digital forensics analysis tool to systematically search for the abusive messages or the web history. But here is a critical warning and a massive blind spot for many young IT professionals. Before you conduct an email investigation, you must research the state or country's specific privacy laws to ensure you stay within legal boundaries.
Really? Even if it's on a company server and they click the warning banner?
Yes, because modern corporate infrastructure is incredibly complex. Let's say your company is headquartered in Texas, but the employee you're investigating works remotely from California, and the cloud server hosting the emails is physically located in a data center in Germany.
Oh, wow. You are now crossing state and international legal jurisdictions.
California has incredibly stringent employee privacy laws compared to Texas, and the European Union's GDPR regulations regarding data access are incredibly strict. You have to ensure your internal investigation doesn't accidentally violate an international data privacy law.
That is a staggering level of complexity.
Yeah.
It really highlights why the IT department have to be in lockstep with the legal department. Speaking of legal landmines, what about employee termination cases? I imagine the atmosphere in the office gets incredibly tense when someone is fired, especially if they have high-level network access.
Employee termination cases are among the most frequent investigations a corporate forensics team will conduct. Usually, these revolve around the suspected abuse of company resources leading up to the firing.
Or the very real fear that a terminated employee might try to sabotage the network or steal proprietary data on their way out the door.
Exactly. The best advice for any future business leader or IT manager here is to never ever act unilaterally. Always consult with your organization's general counsel and the human resources department first.
You need their specific documented direction on how to handle the digital assets of a terminated employee.
If you jump the gun and lock an employee out of their computer improperly, or seize their personal phone that had company email on it without following protocol, you can easily trigger a wrongful termination lawsuit or a privacy violation claim.
Let's escalate the legal complexity even further. There is a scenario mentioned in the source material that sounds like an absolute nightmare for an IT professional: attorney-client privilege investigations, or ACP cases. Why does the text treat these with such extreme caution?
ACP cases are a true minefield because they involve the absolute highest level of protected communication. Attorney-client privilege refers to the legal rules that protect communication between an attorney and their client as strictly legally confidential.
Imagine a scenario where your corporation is under federal investigation for securities fraud. The CEO and the company's legal counsel are sending highly sensitive emails back and forth, discussing legal strategy, analyzing potential liabilities, and sharing draft documents.
Under the law, those communications are privileged. The government cannot use them against the company.
However, if an internal IT administrator or a forensic investigator is conducting a routine audit or investigating a separate issue, and they accidentally read those privileged emails, or worse, accidentally expose that data to a third party or the government,
The privilege can be shattered. It is disastrous. It can literally destroy a company's legal defense.
so how do you handle an investigation if you suspect privileged data might be involved?
With extreme, highly compartmentalized caution. In an ACP investigation, the attorney you are working for is the ultimate authority over the investigation, not the CEO or the head of IT.
The attorney dictates exactly what can be searched and who can see it.
The standard protocol involves 11 basic steps for conducting an ACP case, all designed to ensure effectiveness while maintaining absolute confidentiality.
It usually involves setting up completely isolated, air-gapped forensic workstations.
Right. Yes. And using specialized software to filter out any communications involving law firms before the investigator even looks at the data. And requiring everyone involved to sign non-disclosure agreements, you treat the data like it is radioactive.
Let's escalate to the absolute highest stakes, the real spy movie stuff. Industrial espionage. This isn't just someone wasting time on Netflix. This is the survival of the corporation.
Industrial espionage is the theft of company-sensitive proprietary information or trade secrets, almost always with the intent to sell that data to a rival competitor or a foreign entity.
And the terrifying reality for corporate security is that it is very often committed by an insider threat, a trusted employee, a senior engineer, or a high-level contractor who uses their legitimate network access to steal data, destroy files, or even intentionally distribute malware on the corporate network to cover their tracks during the theft.
Let's create a scenario. You are the IT security manager for an aerospace manufacturing company. You get an alert that a mid-level engineer just downloaded the highly classified CAD blueprints for a next-generation drone wing onto an encrypted USB drive, and badge logs show they just left the building.
Is this just a standard HR termination where you call them and fire them?
Absolutely not. The standard for industrial espionage is much, much higher than a standard HR violation. All suspected industrial espionage cases should be treated strictly as criminal investigations from the very first second.
This is especially critical in your scenario, where the company deals with advanced technologies or defense contracts. If those stolen drone blueprints are taken out of the country or sold to a foreign national, that theft likely violates ITAR, the International Traffic in Arms Regulations, or EAR, the Export Administration Regulations.
And violating ITAR or EAR isn't a corporate HR problem, that's a federal crime.
That is a massive federal crime involving national security. You're now dealing directly with the FBI, the Department of Defense, and potentially Homeland Security.
There are 7 basic steps outlined for conducting these cases, but the overarching rule for the corporate investigator is preservation. You must lock down the evidence, secure the suspect's workstation, preserve all network logs, and maintain a flawless chain of custody as if a team of federal agents is walking through your lobby doors at any moment.
Because in an ITAR violation, they probably will be. Your job is to hand the FBI a perfectly preserved package of digital evidence.
This perfectly transitions us from the theory and the case types into the actual physical lab work. We've talked about the methodology, but let's talk about the forensics, toolkit, and data preservation.
Let's start with a fact from the text that legitimately terrified me. I read it twice to make sure I understood it. The book says that simply turning on a suspect's computer can completely destroy the digital evidence. How is that physically possible? If I just hit the power button to see if the stolen files are sitting on the desktop, how does that ruin the case?
It is a terrifying reality for a novice investigator, and it's the most common way evidence is destroyed by well-meaning IT staff. Let's look at the mechanics of it. Let's say you seize a suspect's laptop that is running a standard consumer operating system like Microsoft Windows.
Right, most business machines run Windows.
If you simply press the power button and let Windows boot up normally to look at the desktop, the operating system doesn't just sit there waiting for you. The second it powers on, Windows instantly and automatically begins writing massive amounts of data to the hard drive in the background.
It updates system registry keys. It alters the last access dates and metadata on thousands of system files. It creates temporary prefetch files, and it writes data to the recycle bin and system restore points.
In the span of 30 seconds, before you've even touched the mouse, the operating system has fundamentally altered the digital landscape of that drive.
So it's the digital equivalent of a detective walking through a muddy, pristine crime scene in golf cleats before the photographer arrives. You've stomped all over the footprints.
That is a perfect analogy. You have irreparably corrupted the quality and integrity of the drive you were trying to preserve. Because you altered the metadata, a defense committee will argue that you cannot prove who created or last accessed the stolen files because you altered the files when you turned the machine on.
What is a cardinal sin in digital forensics? While there are some specialized Windows products being developed to make forensics easier, the inherent limitations and aggressive background processes of standard Windows make it incredibly dangerous for initial data acquisition.
Which explains why the text heavily emphasizes that digital forensics professionals must develop strong skills in Linux.
Linux is the countermeasure. Specialized forensic distributions of the Linux operating system can be used to boot a machine or access a hard drive entirely passively.
A forensic Linux boot disk will mount the suspect's hard drive as RAID-only. It allows the investigator to look at the data without writing a single microscopic byte of data back to the evidence disk. It preserves the crime scene perfectly.
Okay, so if you can't just boot up the suspect's computer in Windows and poke around, how do you actually extract and analyze the data? You might be thinking, why can't I just drag and drop the files onto a thumb drive?
Dragging and dropping is useless for forensics. When you drag and drop a file, the operating system only copies the active, visible files. It completely ignores the hidden data, the deleted file fragments, the system logs, and the empty space on the drive where deleted data still physically resides.
What we call slack space.
Right. To capture everything, you have to follow the absolute first golden rule of digital forensics. Preserve the original evidence, lock it away, and conduct your analysis only on a forensic copy of the data.
I noticed the source material drew a massive, bold line between a bitstream copy and a bitstream image. To a layman, those sound like the exact same thing. What is the actual difference in the lab?
It's a technical distinction regarding how the data is stored. A bitstream copy, which is often referred to as a forensic clone, is a flawless, bit-by-bit, identical duplicate of the entire original storage medium onto a brand new hard drive.
It captures absolutely everything. Every active file, every fragmented deleted file, the slack space, the operating system architecture, exactly as it exists on a microscopic binary level. The new drive is an exact physical twin of the old drive.
A bitstream image, on the other hand, takes that exact same bit-by-bit data, but instead of writing it to a new hard drive, it compresses and packages it into a single massive computer file. We usually refer to this as an image file. You can store multiple bitstream images on one large server.
The rule remains the same. The more exact your forensic copy or image is, the better your chance of retrieving the hidden, deleted, or encrypted evidence.
So the workflow is, you seize the suspect's hard drive, you make a bitstream image of it using a read-only process, you lock the original physical drive in a fireproof safe, and you only ever touch the image file during your investigation.
And to facilitate this entire process safely, you need a properly configured forensic workstation. You cannot just do this on a standard laptop sitting at a coffee shop.
Paint a picture of this forensic workstation for us. If I walk into a corporate forensics lab, what does this setup look like?
Well, a true forensic workstation is a highly specialized piece of hardware. It requires physical security first. An approved secure container, like a heavy-duty fireproof safe, locked by key or combination, bolted to the floor to store the original evidence drives.
The workstation itself is equipped with hardware write blockers. These are physical devices that sit between the suspect's drive and the investigator's computer. They act as a one-way valve.
They allow data to be read from the suspect drive to create the image, but physically block any electrical signal from writing data back to the suspect drive.
It also requires immense processing power and specialized software. The text mentions tools like Autopsy from Sleuthkit, which is an incredible industry-standard suite for recovering deleted files, finding hidden file fragments in slack space, and analyzing massive databases of email messages.
And there's physical protection involved for the hardware itself, right? I read about anti-static gear, which makes it sound a bit like a clean room.
Yes, static electricity is a silent killer of digital evidence. When you are opening up a computer tower, extracting raw hard drives, or handling exposed circuit boards, a single microscopic stray spark of static electricity from your fingertip can instantly fry the circuitry or scramble the magnetic data on the hard drive platters, permanently destroying the evidence.
To prevent this, investigators must use grounded anti-static pads on their workstations and wear anti-static wrist straps that physically ground their bodies, harmlessly bleeding off any static electricity before it can damage the digital evidence.
It is basically digital surgery. You have the sterile environment, the specialized tools, and the mandate to do no harm to the patient being the data.
So we've set up the workstation, we have recovered the data using Autopsy, we have analyzed the deleted emails, and we have our evidence compiled in a thesis. But a corporate investigation isn't just about machines and server logs. It is ultimately about the human beings involved.
Human interactivity is where things get really complicated.
Let's talk about human interactivity in closing the case. In high-tech investigations, you eventually have to step away from the keyboard and talk to the suspect or the witnesses. There is a very important distinction we need to highlight here, especially for IT professionals who might not have a background in law enforcement: the profound difference between an interview and an interrogation.
This is an area where a lot of highly technical people struggle because it requires an entirely different non-technical skill set. It requires soft skills, psychological awareness, and emotional intelligence.
What defines an interview in this context?
An interview is a conversation conducted to collect information from a witness, a victim, or even a suspect about specific facts related to an investigation. It is generally cooperative, fact-finding, and relatively low pressure. In an interview, you are simply asking the basic journalistic questions: who, what, when, where, and how.
Like, what time did you leave the office on Friday? Or who has access to this shared folder?
You are just mapping the terrain. An interrogation is entirely different. It is a highly structured, high-pressure process where the investigator is actively trying to get a suspect to confess to a specific incident or crime.
In an interrogation, you already believe the suspect is guilty based on the digital evidence you've uncovered, and you are pushing for an admission of guilt. It is adversarial. You aren't asking, what time did you leave? You are saying, we know you left at 5:00 p.m., and we know you plugged in a USB drive. Why did you take the files?
For someone whose primary skill and comfort zone is digging through Linux command lines and hex codes, sitting across a table from a hostile defensive suspect must be incredibly challenging. What are the common pitfalls there?
The most common fatal errors in both interviews and interrogations are being unprepared and not having the right questions prepared in advance. Specifically, investigators fail by not having enough deep, probing questions to peel back the layers and uncover the truth.
If you go into an interrogation without knowing the digital evidence inside and out, the suspect will quickly realize you are guessing. If you accuse them of taking a file and they say, "I was working from home that day, check the VPN logs," and you haven't checked the VPN logs, you have lost all leverage.
They will stonewall you, and the interrogation is over. You have to know the digital story better than they do before you ever walk into that room.
Okay, so let's say the investigation is complete. You successfully navigated the technical extraction, you nailed the interrogation, the affidavit is signed, and the HR department terminates the employee, or maybe the jury even returns a guilty verdict. Is the job done? Can the investigator just pack up, go home, and celebrate a closed case?
Not if they are a true professional committed to their craft. The job isn't over when the verdict comes in or the termination papers are signed. The final, critical step of any digital forensics case is critiquing the investigation.
Investigators need to sit down with their department, their peers, or their management team and rigorously review exactly what happened from start to finish.
Like a post-game film analysis in sports. You review the tape to see where you made mistakes.
Exactly like that. You have to be humble enough to ask the hard questions. What extraction tools worked well? Which software tools failed or crashed? Where did we experience friction? Did we almost break the chain of custody during transport? Did we miss a critical piece of IoT evidence that we should have seized on day one?
The source material strongly recommends that investigators take personal notes in a journal about techniques or processes that need to be improved for future investigations. And because of the strict confidentiality we discussed earlier, those journals must be locked away in a secure place.
This critique process is about a commitment to continuous lifelong learning. The technology we use today will be obsolete in 3 years. The only way to stay ahead of the technology curve and the criminals using it is to constantly evaluate and improve your methods.
That brings us full circle perfectly. Let's quickly recap the massive amount of ground we've covered today. We learned that digital forensics is not just undeleting files. It is a highly standardized, mathematically and legally rigorous discipline. It is a scientific method designed to protect public safety in the government sector and ensure corporate survival and business continuity in the private sector.
We explored how the private sector prioritizes minimizing disruption and why that accept button on a corporate warning banner is a company's absolute best legal defense against privacy claims.
We also unpacked the critical importance of professional ethics, the liability of managing attorney-client privilege, the unbreakable documentation of the chain of custody, and the golden rule of forensics. Always preserve the original evidence, protect it from the alterations of standard operating systems, and only ever analyze the bitstream copy.
Which ties right back to our opening hook. That corporate spy who thought they meticulously deleted their tracks, smashed their phone, and committed the perfect crime didn't realize the reality of the modern digital landscape.
They didn't realize that their operating system's registry keys, their smart coffee maker's Wi-Fi logs, and the hidden file fragments resting in the slack space of their hard drive were all quietly, permanently waiting for a digital forensics investigator to make a bitstream copy and mathematically uncover the objective truth. You simply cannot hide from the data.
To our listeners, especially our students at the Dr. Sampak College of Business and beyond, thank you so much for tuning into this deep dive. As you prepare to step into your careers in business and technology, remember that owning your professional growth and embracing this kind of lifelong learning is exactly what will set you apart from the pack.
Please take a moment to review our channel for other playlists, videos, and classes to keep that education going. And again, do not forget to check the description down below for those valuable resources we mentioned earlier.
And remember, we are just getting started on this journey. Be sure to join us for our next deep dive, Chapter 2, Report Writing and Testimony for Digital Technology Assessment and Strategic Decision-Making. We are going to show you exactly how to take all of this incredibly complex technical data and translate it into a compelling, understandable language that judges, juries, and CEOs can actually understand and use.
I am leaving you with a final thought to mull over today. Think about the device you are listening to this on right now, your smartphone, your tablet, your laptop. If a forensic investigator seized it today, put it in an anesthetic bag, locked it in a fireproof safe, and made a flawless bit-by-bit bitstream copy of it, what story would the hidden, deleted, and invisible artifacts tell about you? That's a wrap on this episode of Digital Forensics. Until next time, analyze the copy, preserve the original.